All right. Hey, we have Dean Dovolis, owner and founder of DJR Architecture, which helps with development and has a long history of helping to create affordable housing throughout the Twin Cities. I've had a lot of good conversations with Dean in the past. So, hey, Dean, thanks for being here.
Judy, thank you. And I'm welcome. Excited to be on your show. So much appreciated.
Yeah, awesome. So first, I want to hear your thoughts on a host of various kind of unrelated things. But first, can you just tell me a little bit about your recent work? What projects has your company been doing lately?
So it crosses a lot of domains and a lot of communities. Probably the latest adventure working on has been modular housing. That's been a big push because housing obviously is an elemental right, as you know, for citizens around the world, but its cost has been accelerating year after year. So we kept trying to find new ways to make it affordable, experimenting with micro units, panelized construction, other methodologies to get there and try to get that affordability down. Lately, we've been working on modular construction because, especially in this environment of labor shortages and material disruptions, it has started to prove itself very effective in managing costs. So that's been one effort we've been working. We have several projects actually built and occupied that are modular. One of the largest Twin Cities, Alberta, they actually worked out very well in that process. We've also been working with ideas of community development with the concept of, can we change the real estate market to allow communities to actually have shares in the development? Mm-hmm. And so we've been looking at set up a series of what we call reparation sites with the idea that shares of the development would be sold to the community. And the example I give you is the Green Bay Packers, which the community owns a team, plus they have a good team on top of it. So it makes it a little more desirable. Hopefully the same could be of real estate development. But the idea is that the community can actually buy into it, and it may be based on income, it may be based on geographic, so that people have never experienced real estate before can actually have opportunities of having the appreciation, the depreciation, and experiencing intergenerational wealth that comes with it. Mm-hmm. And that's we're developing and starting to put that together in that. And we have a wide variety of housing projects. We're working with the Upper Harbor with Jamil Ford right now with Mobilized Design. We're working a series of projects now in Denver, starting to expand beyond the area. Projects here, both high-end luxury, all the way down to 30% adjusted median income in the whole gamut on that. Some with mixed use, some as part of master plans. And so it's actually a pretty exciting time because we're seeing a lot of adventures happen simultaneously that are starting to get the issues of equity, community involvement, affordability, opportunity, quality design, participation, and all the other aspects. So we're starting to see a rapid evolution in our industry, a rapid evolution of housing types, and a rapid evolution of more opportunity. So every day I'm going to be truthful with you as an adventure, some good, some bad, but the progress is being made. And that's what the good news is. Even though it seems incredibly incremental to me and painful, it's actually occurring in terms of how we're starting to change the marketplace, the accessibility to it, and the ability to start influencing urban design, urban environments. So I think it'll be a big deal because if we can all get it right, it really will change how development goes forward in the future in the Twin Cities and the nation.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about affordable housing. You have kind of a unique perspective, being very community oriented, but still, working from that side of, you're an architect, you work with developers, things like that. What do you think are some of the roadblocks for creating more affordable housing, maybe specifically in the metro, and what efforts seem to be working right now?
So there's a ton, unfortunately, that could be simply changed by legislation and reallocation. So I'll talk about the big one,
Mhm.
which doesn't seem to get enough airtime. Cities, in order to try to keep their property rates down, have attempted to shift the cost of new development from the city itself and potential homeowners to the developers. And if you think of all the fees that go into putting up the development, sewer access charge, water access charge, park dedication fees, you pay the full cost of consultant. For example, if you TIF increment financing, the developer pays all traffic studies and so forth. So that's one whole basket of fees, and those could add up to 10,000, 15,000, up to 20,000 per unit, just in fees. It doesn't contribute to bricks or mortar or anything else. It's just fees.
Mhm.
So that's a built-in cost, almost like a hidden tax, essentially saying anyone that comes new to my city, you're going to pay the cost of your development, and I'm not going to make the existing residents share that burden. So that really affects affordability. Then the other is zoning. Zoning can be very insidious, as you know, because it can basically zone out certain types of people, certain classes, certain cultures, certain races. And by doing a lot of either high parking requirements, because you know every parking stall costs money. If it's enclosed, it's 25 to 35,000 stall. If it's surface, up to 5,000. Or by very low density requirements, or by minimum lot size, or by minimum unit size. So zoning can be a very critical issue, and zoning is often used as a weapon by communities that don't feel that they want affordable housing to prevent it, because they'll never go after the project directly. It'll only be the conversation, you overburn our schools, it create too much traffic, too tall, too big, too so forth. And so zoning is really an issue. Those two, fortunately, can be changed by legislation, by city's attitude, by process. There could be a relaxation of the fees, for example, by the more affordable housing, the more the fees come down. So that could be a very much tool used in the basis. Same with zoning. The higher the affordability, more flexible may be given on the zoning, potentially. So those two have flexibility on that. The other one, which unfortunately is the issue of the day, is the rapid inflation that's occurring, both in labor rates and both in material costs. And that's running in our industry at 10% a year, which is a tremendous rate. Steel just spiked. So I just had a meeting before about the issues of how to deal with that and how to deal with the price increases and come with it. Lumber, as you know, has been behaving more like an oil commodity, up and down and trying to price it. The labor shortage is very apparent. And that is put tremendous pressure on it. And then we have the backdrop of rise in interest rates. You're starting to see a major pressure occurring on the affordability of housing. And it's not just affecting the 30% MI, which means adjusted median income, the heavily subsidized. It's affecting the 60% heavily. It's affecting the market rate.
Mhm.
So that's another issue that's not just affecting affordability, but affecting the whole housing market in general, which puts more pressure on, because less units get built, thus the existing inventory gets much more expensive.
Mhm.
So that's another factor. Another one, which I would say is a self-inflicted injury, is the St. Paul rent control, which has really been proven to be disastrous, because what it did was freeze all new development in St. Paul and just freeze the creation of new housing. And you probably have read, and you mentioned an article, the lack of new development in St. Paul, the building permits, especially residential, are down considerably. Now, normally more housing creates more opportunity, and there's rules about putting some affordable with the new construction. And so, like example, the Lexington, which is a project we were working on with Bob Lux, which is going to be 192 units, a majority of them affordable. That rent control charter amendment chase the developer away.
Mhm.
Thus, the project went away. Thus, 100 plus units of affordable housing went away. So those can be very dangerous. I know Minneapolis has not enacted one yet. The charter amendment strictly said they were going to study it, but it comes with the same peril. You have to be very intelligent about how those get pulled together.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of barriers, and there's been some money put in through the ARPA, which is American Rescue Plan allocation, which is some of it's gone to housing, but that's a one-time event.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, we'll have a little blip up in the amount of financial aid, but then that's going to get exhausted, and we'll be back to where we were worse off with inflation. So unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers that have been created, but the good side is there's a lot of solutions that could be put in place to help solve this.
Yeah. Do you see any cities doing it right now?
You see, yeah, we'll use Minneapolis for example, because they took a bold plan, the 2040 plan
Mhm.
of upzoning and increasing bonuses for affordable housing and mandating affordable housing in larger projects actually has helped get at it, because Minneapolis gives you bonuses if you provide affordable housing and other factors. And so I have to give credit, because the upzoning allows more housing units to be built, because we are definitely in an inventory question, regardless of income range on that. And that's had an effect on there. The bonuses have been helpful, and the mandatory, because it's being built in instead of trying to subsidize, because there's not enough government money to go around. It's just we don't have a real strong housing policy in this country.
Mhm.
Unlike Singapore, for example, where the government subsidized 67% of the housing, we do not.
Mhm.
So they've built into their zoning ordinance incentives for the private market to provide affordability. So the more housing gets built, the more affordable units start going in place, because if you build so many market rate units, you have to build a percentage of affordable units. So what Minneapolis did, they tacked it on three fronts. They adjusted the density. They eliminated the parking, and parking is a real devil of a cost, because you don't make money on parking, especially if it's structured. You end up having to subsidize it through rents. So they upped the density, they reduced the parking or eliminated the parking, and they increased the incentives. So you're sort of getting at 3 points to make this feasible. So if you actually take a project in Minneapolis, the ones I've done modular, even some of the stick projects, we can achieve 60% adjusted median income just by building it, using no parking, 3-story building, no elevators, efficient unit design, efficient construction methodologies. So that way you can start achieving those numbers without subsidies that you would get through the various government programs to start creating new construction, naturally affordable housing.
Mhm.
So that has gone a long ways in sort of model. Unfortunately, very few surrounding suburbs have adapted it comprehensively. Like Edina has an affordable housing requirement, but they have relaxed their zoning and they have relaxed their parking. So it's great. I have to do units, but gee, I'm still under onus of heavy parking. I'm still limited by the amount of units I can build. So we've only served 1/3 of the problem.
Mhm.
So that makes it tough to get at. So a lot of stuff has to go hand in hand. And of course, the fees, I've seen a few cities give some breaks on it, but not a lot. They tend to hang on to those overcharges of fees judiciously. They don't want to give that up, but that needs to be looked at as a sliding scale also to really help in that issue and give relief. See, Minneapolis has, and I cannot remember the name of the program, if you commit to keeping units at a level of affordability, you get a considerable break on your property taxes.
Sure.
And that is a natural way. And so it's built in there. So there's a lot of levers and tools in combination, but to work where other cities have pieces of the puzzle, but not enough of the puzzle to really help you get to affordable
Right.
bases on your project without subsidy.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Interesting. I don't want to only, spend time talking about this. So I want to ask you about the so you've expressed interest in the development of an urban farm at the Roof Depot site in East Phillips. That's been a major source of conflict, pretty hyper local conflict. It seems now the city is going to demolish the Roof Depot building to build a public works hub. That kind of seems to be the trajectory that's happening right now after the mayor's veto. Do you think this idea about an urban farm sort of property that includes affordable housing, things like that, do you think that's viable in other parts of the neighborhood or other parts of the metro?
So let me correct you on the first part of the statement.
Okay.
Not yet. The mayor's veto is a technical veto, meaning
Okay.
if we agree to certain terms, we'll approve it. And
Mhm.
there's a meeting with Jason, Emily, and Johnson
Mhm.
with the mayor to negotiate this thing.
Was the
So
council members Jason Chavez, Emily
Yep,
Koski, and Andrew
yep,
Johnson? Yep. Okay.
yes. So this thing is very much alive. And the
Okay.
reason why the veto override, the community wanted to prove, ask Jason, prove yourself, stand up to the mayor, so we didn't do the override, but there is a negotiation ongoing on this thing.
Sure.
And we're also entering into mediation with the city because we're dealing with on the legal front. So it's a project is very viable.
Mhm.
Why is it important? For a bunch of reasons. If you take the issues of East Phillips neighborhood, it's one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city and one of the most heavily polluted. So they're actually dealing with both the issues and they've had a high impact. The city's plan unfortunately exacerbates that, makes it worse in terms of creating a service yard. Because not processing water, that'd be the easy part because that's a clean industry, relatively clean. It's really a service yard of trucks and storage of materials and things like that. And then obviously turning on the building releases arsenic and a whole bunch of issues that come with that. And then the third part is a loss of future economic activity.
Mhm.
You lose the idea of community ownership. You lose the idea of the green jobs. You lose the idea of this of all the spin-off jobs that can occur from. So it's a heavy loss that the community would pay for.
Mhm.
It's viable because of the interests of all these groups that have come to us, which is the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute. That's the name of the group that's really spearheading the project and want to be part of it. This is not just a local effort. The Sierra Club, Maine 350, the governor called. We meet with the governor. All the Minneapolis representatives, both House and Senate, have said this is important because of what it represents. Various unions, a whole host of people, because they see this not just for the urban agriculture, and agriculture is part of the food issue and food scarcity issue, which is one component, but they see the aspects of what it could bring in terms of the function of the community ownership, with the idea that we'd set up 3 tiers of ownership. Lowest tier would be the community ownership. When I say lowest tier, that may be the most heavily subsidized, community own the building. Then the middle tier would be tenants of the building, and then the upper tier would be outside investors. But the idea is that it's an asset that's controlled by the community, managed by a nonprofit board that starts giving people ownership in real estate. It starts changing the model a little bit, in which right now real estate tends to be an isolated, generally white man's profession. There's some exemptions to it, but it's not really widely held outside of people that may own single family homes. This starts to give a much broader base. So that's a key piece. So there's an importance in the project, both in terms of the functions, because it's a green zone, but also in terms of how it may change how real estate's looked at, especially on publicly held sites.
Mhm.
And some of the counselors at Minneapolis have said, if you get this right, and I'll use the word when we get it right, we want to use this to guide Lake and Nicolet, the Kmart site redevelopment. We want to use this model to look at how it can look at future phases of the Upper Harbor of Minneapolis. We want to look at this, how we can look at the redevelopment of the Herc site, the garbage burner site in Minneapolis. And so there's a lot of eyes studying this thing, both locally and nationally. So it's a big deal because it could really pave a new way of looking at how real estate development can become a community effort, not only just a private effort. So there's a lot at stake on this, but fortunately, we're still alive in the battle. We're in negotiations. I can't tell you how the story is going to end, but the story is still being written as we speak.
Sure. Thanks for that correction. It's also in the middle of a very residential area, right? It's people's homes and families right around that whole block.
It's the wrong answer. And unfortunately, it was an answer that was established many years ago by city staff that wanted to free up a site in Northeast Minneapolis where existing water maintenance yard is, to open that up for redevelopment.
Right.
So the idea is they'd move it to Phillips, heavily impacted neighborhood, to open up the site in North Minneapolis for redevelopment. It's like, wrong answer. You can't do that. And it would increase in our pollution, because there's a law called the Clark-Berglund law, which is written, that's been passed by the state legislature, that apply to this neighborhood, which addresses cumulative pollution. They can't just look at a single source, you have to look at the cumulative sources and then make your judgment on that you cannot add any more impactful industries or functions in this neighborhood. So there's a lot of issues upstanding that law and the development and so forth. So yeah, it's the wrong answer. It's just that you tend to have, they call it environmental, you've heard the term environmental racism. This is a very high example of it, where you tend to put noxious uses in the neighborhood that has the least public representation, or at least public power. East Phillips is one of those neighborhoods. They're in that situation, and they're repeating that negative history and over again. So hopefully we can start reversing it, especially on top of the factor that the city designated that area as part of the Green Zone Initiative. So this goes opposite to that designation.
Sure. Thanks for that correction too. Maybe
don't worry.
Yeah, maybe you could speak to some of that community ownership. I'm seeing some of those efforts on Lake Street right now. I recently wrote an article at 3030 Nicollet, which is, right off Lake Street too, about creating like commercial condos in an apartment building. Do you see other efforts happening around the city or state for kind of bringing the community into these real estate ventures?
Yeah, it's just beginning. And Lake Street was sort of the realization that we can't plow on the same model. The beauty of the Roof Depot building, that building's 230,000 square feet. So it's a much more major, impactful structure. And it's a structure that could generate up to 1,000 jobs when it's fully developed with the various uses they have programmed within it. So the thought is that if we can get enough subsidy, and subsidy maybe from our quality of the tenants, subsidy maybe from the outside and so forth, we can underwrite the shares of the community. So let's say example that to buy into this costs $10 a share, just to pull a number. So our hope is that maybe for the community we may have to establish income restrictions, like we do with housing, using the same AMI rules, that instead of a community member with low income paying $10 a share, they would pay $5 a share. And then the thought is tenants of the building to be rewarded. They may pay $8 or $7.50 a share versus 10. And then the outside investors would pay what I call market value at $10 a share. With the idea that those benefits of real estate, which we all know about, depreciation, which really reduces the tax burden, appreciation, which creates future wealth, and then obviously distribution of income based on cash flow of the building, become an element that stays with the community year after year. And so the benefits of real estate become further spread to more people. Right now we think in terms of direct subsidies of people, direct payments, direct issues that fall into it. this becomes a much more of an indirect subsidy that can go on for many years and
Yeah.
thus have a much, because then you use natural market forces appreciation to build wealth as opposed to give people money and hope it lasts long enough. So it's our change of model that the dollars used to subsidize this will have a much longer effect than a one-time check or one-time payment. So it really opens up. And the fact that the asset stays in the community guarantees it stays in the community. Unfortunately, I've witnessed enough tragic examples of for-profit and nonprofit developers losing the asset because they cross-collateralized as a bank and thus everything was taken back. When you have diverse ownership, it protects the asset. That's why you've never heard comments of why the Green Bay Packers will never move out of Green Bay, even though it's not the greatest football market in the world, because in terms of viewer size or scale, because it's locked in by this diverse holding of ownership.
Mhm.
So the same model occurs here, that an asset of 230,000 square feet of readily marketable warehouse, agriculture, community space is protected and not held vulnerable to a purely nonprofit owner or a for-profit owner who may make a mistake, not at their fault, and the building could be lost to the bank or some other source. So it provides a greater degree of permanency for the asset also. So it really covers a lot of fronts that can really be helpful
Yeah.
on that. So
Yeah.
it's exciting. And now we're working on how the Lake and Nick could be willing to apply for larger diversity developers, because how you set those sites up really start creating the future opportunities that could occur on it.
Yeah. Cool.
So I could go on longer with ideas, but I want to be respectful of your time and the questions you're asking. But there's a lot to it, and that's why this is exciting, because you can see it starting to happen, as you mentioned. And I think this is good for the community and for the country as a whole.
Yeah, cool. You and I, the last time we talked, it was about a development in East Phillips that was funded by an East African woman, or she was the investor in the project. I think a Somali woman.
Yep.
You said something to me about like we're in the awakening of the next generation of American investors regarding the East African community. I thought that was a really interesting point, and could you speak to that a little bit?
It's more, and every day it gets more dramatic than you think. And what's occurring as these wave of immigrants have come over and they start learning the American system and the American capitalism, which they tend to thrive in. It's sort of capitalism gives a freedom of thought and structure that they've never had, the advantages in countries, their home countries. They're starting to accumulate wealth. They're starting to accumulate savvy. They're starting to accumulate knowledge. And what's starting to happen is, and this is very true for any type of reinvestment, everyone always looks for the messiah that comes from the outside, like Google or Amazon. And I say, we got to bring this star player in. In reality, the genius and talent and investment actually lies within the community. That's actually your strongest asset to untap and to work. And so what I'm seeing in these diverse communities, they're beginning to invest in their communities, and they don't have the fear of the community or the prejudice of the community, because they understand the community that they're in. And so these African communities are pulling in money and looking at real estate. And I get calls all the time. Can you help me with this project? Can you put this together? The Roof Depot building, in which we're raising investors for, members of the East African community came forward to me and said, we want to be part of this. We're willing to raise money and invest in it, because they see how it can benefit the community. We want to be part of this dream. So you start seeing these various cultures between the Latinx community, the Native American community, the African community, organizing dollars, organizing investments. Some are 2-unit buildings, some are 5-unit buildings, some are 3 units, some are larger, like the one at 26 in Nicollet, that they're starting to invest in our communities and start driving the changeover that everyone was hoping for would come from some outside source is actually being generated internally within the community.
Yeah.
And the fact that Minneapolis has some flexibility in its zoning ordinance is allowing them to start performing the redevelopments of their neighborhoods. Lake Street will be rebuilt by the community, and that's what's beginning. If you look at those developments, are generally community-based or ethically owned, and that's the same as happening. So that's a secret sauce that most people don't realize yet that is going to emerge. And I wish I could tell you about the efforts on the north side that we've begun, which is going to be stunning in its own right. But I got to be, we're not quite ready for prime time yet, but it's there and it's coming.
Sure.
So it's not just within the East Phillips neighborhood, which is a prime example, but starting to occur in other communities also. So there's a ton of potential that lies within the inner cities that's just being realized that I think will carry the cities very far into the future.
Yeah. Cool. That is awesome. Yeah, whenever that's ready for prime time, feel free to reach out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, and then kind of one of the last things I wanted to ask about was sustainable development. You've already talked a bit about sustainability, having, the green zone in East Phillips. What efforts are you seeing around sustainable development, energy efficient homes? When do you think we're at a time where we need to start retrofitting old homes to be more energy efficient? Are you seeing these efforts happening in mass for new homes? What are you seeing around all of that?
You're seeing, as I'm going to call some historical efforts, and I'm going to call some new efforts, because there's really two classes. The energy efficient old homes really started during the first energy crisis in the 70s and afterwards. And then there were some mistakes made, as you know, because they super vapor buried houses and they rotted from the inside and all that. But that was the beginning of the retrofit. Once you figure out how to make breeds of materials, we got past that. So generally, building standards and building codes have been getting more and more energy efficient, and the R value requirements have been increasing. So our buildings are improving by code, and buildings are being retrofitted for the dollars. So that's one area. But the other area that's just beginning is energy generation, meaning creating the energy to green energy to supply it. And like the Roof Depot that has a 230,000 square foot roof, which would supply the neighborhood. Local solar grids, local power grids, local windmill. You're starting to see the element of not just preserving energy, but now generating energy through a lot of technological advances, which are coming faster and faster every day. You read the one about creating water out of humidity that was at Amazon. I can't remember which company invested in that. Basically, it's a dehumidifier, so a water source. You learn about, obviously, solar speaks for itself in terms of energy panels and so forth. There's production, wind production through what they call vertical wind turbines. Is it creating all these other elements are starting to begin. So what is starting to happen is the US used to have major power plants in which it'd be fed out to the grid. So you'd have like single point of power production out. So the approach that is starting to become is what I call resilient grids, in which there's multiple sources of power being fed into the grid. So not just one major producer could go down, because you know about electricity, as it travels through lines, you lose a lot of electricity to the air, so to speak. The power declines over distance. So if you start creating multiple vortices of energy creation, your efficiency goes up because it's closer to the source of usage. It's closer home, and it's resilient that if one part of the grid fails for whatever, other parts can pick it up because there's multiple production points. That's where it's starting at, because I think we got a pretty good handle on efficiency of materials, on retrofitting of buildings, on the logic of installation and green energy. But now we're looking at energy production, a greener production of materials, a greener production of construction. We're starting to focus in on that area. And that's what I call the new generation versus the historic. One was the retrofitting, but now it's how we produce our products, how we distribute them, and how we actually build our structures to make them much greener.
Yeah.
And, modular is one example of that because the efficiency of construction and heated warehouse and the weight, construction weights knocked down by 50% because materials aggregated, transportation costs drop, whether you don't do temporary, so there's a lot of factors, and that's just changing construction methodology, for an example. So that's really where I think the next wave is going to occur in the greening of our society on that basis.
Yeah. I think those are DERMS systems are part of that. It's with a DERMS system, DERMS, right?
Yep.
Northfield is looking at that right now. There's a bill going through the legislature related to trying to make something like that happen there.
Correct. And the key to that is you're seeing in this towns, and it goes back to investment. That's a one-time investment by the state that will pay dividends over decades.
Right.
And that's what the beauty of this is, as opposed to subsidizing people's heat, which you need. But if we can change the system by one-time investment, you change the affordability going forward. So you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah. And it ties to kind of what you were saying about community ownership is if it's coming from all these sources, it's kind of a lot safer in a lot of ways.
Correct. There's a redundancy in the system.
Right. Yeah. So Dean, I really appreciate your perspective. I always enjoy talking to you. I don't have any other questions. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just appreciate what you're doing, but stay tuned because there's so much more yet to come. This is a very period of rapid transition, and more is going to occur that I think I'm going to be truthful. I think 5 years from now, there's going to be elements of our society you're not going to recognize for the positive in a lot of areas. And so please keep reporting on these trends, because even though there tends to be a negative vibe on urbanism and cities and all that, the opposite is really occurring. It's just been masked by overall issues of unrest, crime, and so forth. But there's a lot that's occurring that's outside the boardroom. And that's what's good about this. And that's what's interesting, and outside the country clubs and within the community. So it's a good thing. And I just appreciate you covering these aspects. So thank you.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Yep.
Thanks, AD. Thank you.